it's time to finish a quilt. Okay, so regular viewers will have seen the progress of my first larger quilt, Edgar Allan Poe themed fabrics, over the past several years. We're in the final stages now. So let's pop down to the living room where I can spread things out on the floor and we'll take a look at where we're at. Okay, so regular viewers will have seen over the past several years the slow progress of my first larger quilt. So we've got a little bit left to do on it, and we'll see if we can get it finished this week. So let's pop down to the living room where I can spread it out and we'll see where we're at and what we've got left to do. Okay, so we have the quilt back laid out on the floor, pretty side downwards. We're going to layer that up with the batting. I've gone with 100% cotton batting. Fingers crossed it's the right size. But that's what we're going with, so that'll go on next, and then we'll put the top on top. And then I have some quilters safety pins, which you probably can't quite see in this lighting, but they are curved safety pins. That should make it easier to pin through. That's what we use to base the layers together. So let's get on with making a quilt sandwich, and I will try my best not to knock you over. We have mild chaos going on at the moment. This should be a bit larger than everything, if I've got it right. There's going to be some stunning shots of probably my backside as we're sorting this out. This sort of batting is supposedly good for hand quilting. Don't think I'm going to be hand quilting this one though. I'll probably do it on the machine just for sake of speed and efficiency. Of course, with the batting being bigger than the back, there's going to be some shenanigans trying to make sure we've got the top lined up properly. Could trim it down a bit, I suppose, but we'll do that later. Yes, Leo, helpful. Let's make it as smooth as we can. I say I'm going to have to crawl over bits of it, so it's not going to be perfect, but that's what happens when you've got limited space. Okay. Oh. Let's grab the pins as well while I'm down here. Okay. Which bit of this is the top edge? Call this one the top edge. Doesn't matter too much with it being a log cabin quilt. Okay, so we need to try and centre this as far as possible on the back. And the back should be bigger than the front. There is going to be a reasonable amount of wastage on the wadding in theory from this, but even the amounts that are going to come off here will be useful for, you know, mug rugs and small projects. So I'm not going to worry too much about making sure that all of the offcuts are on the same side or anything. Okay, so that's there. It's got side outside all the way up there. Okay, I think that's close enough to centred. As this is the first quilt, and as it is just going over the back of an armchair, rather than like hanging on display or being gifted or anything like that, good enough is good enough. It just needs to be done. Okay, so there's all my layers. Now we need to pin. So if I pin essentially in the middle of each log cabin, that I think should probably do it. I can then put more pins around the border if I need to. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 across. 3, 4, 5 down, so 5 5's 25. So 25 pins for the middle bit. And then however many I need, maybe 2 on each side, 1 in the corner, for the border. If I'm just getting out a rough number of pins at the moment, I'll grab more if I need more. So I would imagine best practice would be to have you starting in the centre and working your way out to make sure that everything remains, so everything stays even. Don't know how easy that's going to be as I'm working on carpet. So I might just start in the corner and work my way across to just hold everything in place and then spread out from there. So yeah, like I say, probably not best practice, but it is what it is. As if I was working on a hard surface, I wouldn't really have any issue going in with the pin and not worrying about things moving, but that's not what I'm doing. So let's do the corners first, at this end. I mean, I may not even need to do every log cabin. It's not that big a quilt. Go through. There you go. Okay, so that's the corners. I'm going to try this one and see if it will scoop through. If it will, I can then go to the middle No, it's just getting lost in the carpet. Obviously that's not helpful. Okay, so we'll do these two. Then we'll do 3 and we'll do 2 and we'll do 3 and then we'll see how we feel about it. Same as when I'm cutting out for dressmaking, I have to keep constantly smoothing things down because I have to keep moving things around because we just have to make do sometimes. It would be feasible to quilt this by hand, but as I say, I think the time it will take is just too long for what I am aiming for. Before I do the bottom half, I'm just going to put some pins in this border and in the corners. Okay, so that is everything pinned out. I think that should do it. I'm not going to show you the back because that will have picked up all of the cat hairs that have gathered throughout the day on the floor. So that will get lint rolled later. But, yeah, so next step is to quilt this quilt sandwich. I'm thinking that I quilt around the outside edge of each of the log cabin blocks and around the edge of the main panel and just leave it as that. So fairly light quilting. That's my thinking anyway. Just need to double check that that is close enough together for this batting. I think it probably will be. If not, or if I decide I want more, there's obviously lines I can quilt along inside as well. And once that's done, we can decide what's happening with the binding in terms of how wide of a binding do we want, because I do have that other fabric to cut binding out of. Although there is a fair bit left over on some sides at least of for the backing fabric, because I did get it larger than this, so we'll see. I'm not too worried if the border on the back ends up slightly uneven, so like one side is narrower than, like the side is narrower than the top and bottom or what have you, because the back turned out quite rectangular, so I needed to square it up a bit anyway, and it's the back, so you know, it's, if we lose a little bit of the grunge at the sides, that's not a problem. But yeah, it's coming together, so that will be probably Tuesday's project. Today is Sunday. Probably Tuesday's project to get this quilted, because it's late afternoon now, so we're heading towards dinner. yeah, so I can get that quilted on Tuesday and bound on Thursday, maybe Friday. The hesitation is that I do teach on a Thursday, but not for long. So I do still have the bulk of the day. So yeah, onwards. Okay, so I've cleared the decks a bit because I need a bit more room for wrangling the quilt, which is just here. And I've attached my walking foot to my sewing machine. I've had it a while. I've never used it before. So we'll see how that goes. It's on. Seems to be right. So yeah. So I'm going to start in the middle of the quilt, do a straight line up the middle. I'm effectively stitching in the ditch. So I'll do that. But in order to get the quilt through the throat of my machine, which is obviously limited for size, I'm going to need to roll it up a bit. So there's going to be a bit of wrangling and what have you. So I'll get on with that and I'll come back to you once it's done. Okay, so that's my last line of main quilting done. So it's lightly quilted just around the outside of the log cabin box. I'm pretty happy with how it's turned out so far. Are my quilting lines straight? Not exactly. Are my pieced seams straight? No. So it doesn't really matter. So yes, that bit's done. Now what I have seen a lot of quilters do on YouTube before they bind the quilt is a lap of honour. So stitch line around the outside of the border, inside the seam allowance for the binding. So I'm going to do that, and then the quilting portion is done. Okay, so that's my lap of honour done. There's the front of my quilt, there's the back of my quilt. I've used a grey thread for my quilting because why not? The grey doesn't sort of shout in your face, and with the neutral colours on this quilt it sort of works well. I did lengthen my stitch compared to what I used for dressmaking because obviously more layers to go through. Yeah, so we're ready for the next step. So I'm going to take this downstairs where I've got more room and trim off the excess, remove all the quilting pins, that kind of thing. I'm also going to remind myself how to bind a quilt because the only one I've done before, excuse the rustling, is this one, which came as a kit and I did by hand and completed quite some time ago. So I need to, March 2020 I finished this one. I've actually put a label on it. So yeah, so I need to go and remind myself how to do that because that's 5 years ago. And then the next time I pick up this quilt to do some filming will hopefully be Thursday. And that'll be binding it and then we'll be done. So yeah, ticking along. Okay, so the quilting is done. The binding fabric is here and I have looked at a few videos on how to bind quilts. I will probably be looking again at some point. So first step is to cut the binding. I'm going to go with what I believe is a standard width of binding. So we're going to go for 2.5 inch strips. Cut width of fabric, so straight of grain. We're not dealing with bias tape. If you can hear the dragon in the background, it's because I've just pressed the binding fabric. Hopefully the mic isn't picking it up though. So I've folded my binding fabric so that it's narrower than my quilting ruler. But if I just move the quilt itself out of the way, you should be able to see what I'm doing a bit better. Okay, so there's my cutting mat. So yeah, so I've folded the binding fabric narrower than my quilting ruler so that I can just cut the strips. I'm going to be using my rotary cutter, which is why I've got the cutting mat out. So my quilting ruler is measured in centimetres. I think in inches when it comes to sewing. So, where did I pop my washi tape? Oh, I think I've tidied that all away. Oh, I've got some masking tape, maybe grab that. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure 2.5 inches on my quilting ruler, and I'm going to mark that with the masking tape. The scissors aren't looking very well at weighing that down. Let's see if the rotary cutter does. There we go. Just holding the tape in place. I don't measure from the end of my measuring tape most of the time because it stretches. Okay, so I'm going to mark it so that the edge of the tape is at the 2.5 inch mark. Then I can line up my cuts to the masking tape, which should help me get my width of fabric properly. Yeah, okay. It's the same as when I put washi tape on the sewing machine. You can probably see it in the corner of the shot there, to help measure seams. Same sort of idea. So I'll be lining up the edge of my fabric to the masking tape, cutting a width, and then moving on to the next one. First thing I'm going to do though is just straighten up the edge, because obviously if we're going width of fabric, we're going selvage to selvage, which means we're working from a cut edge. So I'm going to take a sliver off the end. Taking the rotary cutter away from me along the side of my ruler. Now I've calculated that I should need 5 strips, and that should be more than enough for my border. We'll see. So I will also need to take the selvages off. Now you lose a bit of length as well for when you're joining the strips. Hasn't gone quite the way through. I've gone most of the way through, just that bit. So there's one. There's 2, so I'll get the rest of these cut out, and then we'll come back and take a look at how we join them together. Okay, so I've got my strips, and both sides are fairly similar, so if I do get the wrong side out, it's not going to matter too much. We're going to put them together, technically wrong sides facing. We're going to match them up on the right angle, like that, and we're going to sew diagonally across there. Press open and all that sort of stuff. I'm going to sew them all first, and then I'll do the pressing. So I should end up with a long strip of binding. So I'm just going to grab my pins, which are behind me, because I cleared the table for the quilting project obviously takes up a fair amount of space. So yes, we're going to cut across on a 45-degree angle, trim and press, and then we'll be good to go with the actual binding process. So I'll get on with that. I've still got my walking foot on the machine from quilting. I don't think that's going to cause me any problems. I will shorten my stitch length back down, probably increase it for the binding. Now that my needle is down, I'm going to remove that pin so that I don't sew over it. And there we have one join. You can see the slight inaccuracies of my cutting, but I'm not going to worry too much about that. Oh no, it's not the cutting, it's the sewing. It's fine. It won't show too much in the binding, I don't think. And I mean, the rest of the quilt's slightly wonky, so yeah. See if we can do a better job on the next one. It's because I'm not marking the lines. So we'll get to the end there, grab another strip. Okay, so we're placing the strips at a 90-degree angle to each other. So creating a right angle, pinning them together, and sewing at a 45-degree angle. See if we can get it to start on the actual corner this time. Yep, that's much better. Okay, so I will join all of my strips together, and then we will take a look at getting it attached to the quilt, which may or may not go to plan. Okay, so I've got my binding strip loosely rolled up so I can manage it a little bit because not a lot of space. I've got my quilt and I've got some clips. Now there are an abundance, or there is an abundance, of videos on YouTube on how to bind quilts. I am following Just Get It Done Quilt's simpler method from her binding basics video because it's the simpler method. So I've rewatched a bit of it. I'll probably rewatch a bit more. Just going to unroll my strip a bit. So I'm putting the strip on the top about halfway along the bottom of the quilt. I'm going to fold the corner down 45 degrees and clip it in place there. Then I fold down this bit to meet there, and we clip it here. Just going to clip that along towards the corner. So I need to re-watch the corner bit just to make sure that I've got the basic concept in my head of how to do the mitered corners, but I will double check it before I actually do it. Because, you know, first time. Okay. So that's the first section of binding clipped on. And once it's sewn, it's going to provide a little pocket to put the end of my binding in. so I don't have to do any weird twisting and funkiness that's on the more fiddly version. So yes, I'm going to sew this first and then do the corner, I think, because I need to get to that 1/4 inch anyway. So yeah. Okay, let's do the sewing machine. One day, I will have a sewing room that actually has space. I don't know when that one day will be. It's not today. Good. Right. Let's tuck you in there with a bit of slack. Just to keep you safe. Over to the machine. 1/4 inch is usually about the width of a foot. Yeah, so that's about 1/4 inch. I do have it marked on my machine with some washi tape. Okay. So I'm going to get this line of stitching sewn. Then I'll come back to you when I'm doing the corner. Not necessarily the first corner, I might do a practice one first. And show you how we do mitered corners. Okay, so here is my first attempt at the corner. Pretty pleased with it. So you're going to have a loose, like, put you in shot, a little loose flap there. And when you turn it over to the back, which is what we were doing later, you get a nice little corner. So yeah, that's working well. Now how do we do it? So I'm at the next corner. Can we see what's going on is the question. Okay, hopefully, let's just move you up and over a little bit more. Okay, so I've sewn the binding to a 1/4 inch away from the corner. You then fold the corner for a 45-degree angle. So you're going to end up with a right angle here and a 45-degree angle there. Then you fold it back onto the side that you're about to sew. And then we clip it in place. I'm clipping it at the fold bit there because that gets it out the way of my foot. And I'm going to clip along this side as well. And we can do that all the way around. So I'll come back to you once I've got all the binding sewn on. Okay, so I am nearly back at where I started. I've got the last half of the bottom clipped mostly in place. Just going to clip a little bit further down. And now I'm going to cut the excess off. So I want a bit of an overlap with what we've already sewn. So I want to go a little bit past where the diagonal is. I probably want to cut it on a diagonal as well. So we're going to cut that off. If I find that's too much, I can always cut it again. So we've got that much left of my 5 strips of binding, so that's not bad going. It's a handy width to have. So now we want to poke this end in here. Use the closed scissors to get that last bit in. Probably could have done a better job at cutting it to length, maybe done it a little bit shorter. Yeah, maybe done a little bit more of a diagonal. So I'm going to trim it a little bit more off. We'll put that in the scrap bin. And this is all going to be enclosed when we fold it over to the back anyway, but you want it to be as little bulk as possible. Okay, that'll do me for my first go. So I'm just going to sew this last bit of this part of the binding down, and then we'll look at flipping it over to the back and how we fix it to the back. We're nearly done. Okay, so the first part of the binding is all sewn on. I don't think I've got too much of the lap of honour showing through, which is good. So what we're going to do is we're going to roll the binding over to the back. Hopefully it will cover up the stitch lines, and then we're going to clip it in place all the way around. Now traditionally you would be hand sewing the binding down to the back, but obviously that's going to take time, and I want this done and finished, so I am going to machine sew my binding down. So I could sew from the back to the front, I could stitch in the ditch, or I could top stitch from the front. So stitch in the ditch you do from the front as well. So whilst I go around clipping and making sure that my corners are going to look neat on the back, I've got a little ponder as to how I'm going to sew this down. So I'm just making sure that when I get to the corners, folding them so that we've got a fairly nice, neat little mitre there, clipping it in place. Okay, so I opted to top stitch, well, edge stitch the binding down from the top side. Does mean that although this bit is kind of nice and neat on both sides, there are a few bits where I haven't quite caught the binding on the back. That's okay, I can fix that with a bit of hand sewing later. So yeah, let me just lift you up a little bit. Okay, so yeah, it's essentially done. I just need to catch in those little bits where I've missed the back of the binding. Most of it I think is fine. This side's got a little bit, so let me just pop a little clip there so I can see it when I come back later. I need to finish off my thread ends as well. So I'll go and do that in a minute and catch in these bits and pieces. I managed to completely miss that corner. That bit I've somehow managed to turn the fabric the wrong way, so I'll unpick and redo that bit. A little bit there. Yeah, I think these are the bits where I sped up slightly. But they're only short bits. And you know, I miss more probably when I put bias binding on the neckline of a t-shirt or something. So yeah, it's just those few bits that actually need catching by hand, and the thread ends that need finishing off. So I'm going to go and do that, and then we'll take a look at the finished quilt. Okay, so here is the quilt all finished, all bound, all quilted. This is obviously the front side. I'll just flip it over and show you the back. So there we have the back, which is also kind of cute. So you can see the Edgar Allen Poe influence a bit more clearly on the back because of the size of the pieces. So yes, that is the quilt all finished. So I've enjoyed making this project. I've been meaning to make a quilt for quite a long time. This is the first sort of usable size rather than purely decorative quilt. So yes, so that's that project done. So that's another long-term WIP off the list, all completed, all finished. So thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I look forward to seeing you in my next video. In the meantime, there's this one here that may be of interest to you, and I will see you soon. But until then, happy crafting and bye-bye for now.